The third London Perl Mongers technical meeting of 2016. We're very lucky this evening to have a really convenient venue right in the centre of London. And that venue has been provided to us by Super, in case you haven't already figured that out.
I just wanted to welcome you here. First of all, it's my duty to tell you where the fire exits are in the toilet. So you might, there's the toilets where you go in there, take a left, they're just outside the doors. Sorry? It depends relatively which way you're looking, but it's left as I'm looking this way. And then, of course, the fire exit is just here out this door down here. So I wanted to welcome you here to Super. It's great to see the Perl community here. Super is a big supporter of the Perl community. We love Perl. It's the foundation of our business. We built a £1 billion business based on this Perl foundation. I have to admit, this is my first London Perl Mongers meetup. And I've been in Perl now through my associations with the FT, The Guardian, Amazon, Love Film, and now here. That's a number of years, and I recognise some of the faces here as well. And I thought it's about time I turned up to these, and it's about time actually that we gave something back and hosted one, so we're really pleased to see you here. And actually, when I reeled back those companies then, I just realised that they're not Perl anymore, are they? They've all moved away. Is it me? Or is it, but we've tried. So this is a good safe harbour, the last bastion of Perl here in London. And with Photo Box, we're just here on the side. So welcome. It's great to see you here. We'll do this again sometime as well. You're always welcome here. It's a good location, and it's great to see you. So enjoy the rest of your day, your night.
For those of you who don't know the format, basically we're going to have 6 talks this evening. Because I'm sure you've all had busy days, we try and keep those talks very short. After each talk we will take a few questions, but again we'd like to keep the questions short. There's going to be a break after the first 3 talks and then a break after the meeting. So if you want to have detailed discussions with the speakers or with anyone else, there's plenty of chance to do that. We like to keep it all moving fairly quickly. I have a whole load of notes about what I'm going to say to you now, and they're all in my flat, so I'm just making stuff up. The important things are that before the break, we're going to have some lightning adverts, and what that is, it's a chance for someone to stand up for up to a minute, maybe 30 seconds, and just shout out something about what you're doing with Perl, what you'd like to do, something you'd like to talk with people about in the break. So have a little think now about lightning adverts you might want to give. Remember, of course, all our speakers here are volunteers. None of us are kind of doing this because we're slick professionals, which is why I don't have any notes. So the main thing about this is it's our community. We're all looking after each other. So if you have kind of that temptation to ask a really annoying, smart-ass question, then, a bit of self-control would be marvellous. And also, if you want to sit tapping away on your laptop, that's fine, but the exits are where Ryan's just told us, so, that's fine too. Our very first speaker this evening has come all the way from Salford. I'm a Mancunian myself, so I know how important it is to get this right. Hakim Cassimally is going to ask and maybe answer the question, is Haskell an acceptable Perl?
So the talk title is meant to be a little bit provocative, and of course, why am I even comparing Haskell and Perl, which are quite different languages? And of course, the reason that I got interested in functional programming is largely in part to Mark Jason Dominus' seminal book, Higher Order Perl, which looked at functional programming techniques in Perl rather than in one of the traditional languages, which at the time would have been things like Lisp and ML, as well as more recently things like Haskell. And he discovered that actually Perl is very similar to Lisp, and much more so than it is to languages like C. So, for example, there are some really important and powerful features like automatic memory management and first-class functions and so on that they share. And he lists, so Norvig listed 7 features that make Lisp Lisp, and Perl shares 6 of those. And in case you're wondering, the one it doesn't is regular syntax, but you can't have everything. So I'm going to talk about why you might want to program in Haskell if you're a Perl programmer. And the last time I gave this talk, I got told off because the colour scheme of green and red might have implied that, for example, Perl code boo, because in red, and Haskell code in green was good. And it's actually not true, because the colour scheme was given to me by my, my knitted pink and green cat, Mr. Socks. So now that we've cleared that up, we'll go straight to an example. So this is just a very sort of simple motivating example. If I had a list of strings, there are some names, Annie, Bob and Chandra, and I want to get a list of integers, which are the lengths of those strings. Any suggestions how you might do that in Perl? Map, fantastic. So a map, but what would I use with map? Length, very good. So, and it turns out that map length is exactly how you do the same thing in Haskell. So far they're looking quite similar. So there you've got map, and you've got the curly braces in Perl, and in fact you don't even need the curly braces. You can use map length comma, slightly less used in Perl generally, but it tickles me that those two are now practically the same syntax to do the same thing. So you know, you're thinking, oh, actually they're quite similar. But look behind the hood, look under the hood, and you see that the implementations are really quite different. So for example, in the Haskell version, you've got length, which is a function that takes a string and returns an integer. So length of Annie is 5. And you've got map, which takes a function like length, which goes from a type to another type, from string to integer, takes a list of the first type, list of strings, and returns a list of the second type, list of integers. And one of the interesting things in Haskell is you've got the currying partial application thing, where map length is itself a function, and it's a function that's lifted length to becoming a function that takes the length of a list of strings rather than a single string. So that's kind of quite interesting. And of course, Perl doesn't do it that way, because Perl's map takes either an expression or block, and that's the difference between that length comma and the length in the curly braces. And so that's an expression rather than a function. So where's it getting the actual parameters from? And it turns out it gets it from, as we know, $_. So how does length, which normally gets given a parameter, know that it needs to speak to this $_ variable? Well, it's documented that if the string is omitted, then it'll use this $_. So we've got two totally different ways of doing the same thing, but we end up getting nice convenient syntax. It's kind of interesting. And what's interesting as well is that both of those ways tell you something about what the languages are trying to do and what their concerns are. So the Perl one tells you about expressions. It tells you about this implicit variable, $_, which is really important in a lot of Perl idioms. And it tells you that Perl's got optional parameters, so you know, which Haskell doesn't generally have. And the Haskell's thing tell you that that programming language is into the idea of functions, of lifting functions into different contexts, and also this currying partial application stuff. So I got a little bit interested in, you know, what other things that look to do with maps can be done in both Haskell and Perl, and how do they look? So for example, if you wanted to double a list of numbers, again, the expressions look quite similar. The Haskell one's got a quite convenient ×2 notation, and in Perl, even though I said the $_ was implicit, we've had to actually explicitly write it down this time, which so I got a bit of Haskell envy and was like, oh, can we get rid of that $_? And most of the talk is about me trying to not write $_, because I get a bit obsessed about that kind of thing. So I wrote a function called double, and double of x is x times 2. I'm using the experimental Perl signatures because I think it makes the code look nicer in all of these examples. So in the Haskell version, you map over the double function, but of course Perl isn't mapping with functions, it's using expressions. So I still have to put $_ in there. Damn it. So, next attempt, we could rewrite the double function to use $_ instead of a normal parameter. You know, that works, that's fine, but it seems like a little bit of a hack. So one way we could do it is write our own map function. And effectively, we can write a function called fmap that takes a function in and then applies this $_. So it kind of converts the function into what Perl's expecting. So now we can get our list of numbers 1 to 5, and we return 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So that's looking, you know, quite nice. Obviously, the Perl's got a bit more punctuation, but you know, we're used to punctuation in Perl with the reference to the function there. So another way we could do it is write a conversion function and wrap that double in and create a new function out of it that actually converts the $_ into a normal function. And that's sort of reasonably nice, except that having to write 2_ is a bit sad. So here's a little bit of fun. How many people have used Perl prototypes? More than I was hoping, actually, because it's the kind of thing that you probably don't want to use most of the time. But for the odd little thing where you want to do something a little bit naughty, I didn't want to write brackets around that double function. I wanted to write _ and then that function name. So I want to use prototypes, but of course that clashes with the fact I was using signatures. So I have to turn off the signatures, use a prototype there, and that allows me to do this. I'm not sure whether that's actually nicer than just using $_, but that was a little bit of fun. So a couple of other things. If we wanted to reverse a list of strings, we could map the reverse function over it. Does Perl have a reverse function? Yes, it does. So fantastic. We can use map reverse foobar, and it'll give us an empty list. So this really confused me. And if I forget what the reason is, it still confuses me. Because Perl does, in fact, have a reverse function. It takes a string, it reverses that string. And if you don't pass it a parameter, it'll use $_, so it should use the implicit thing. So why isn't that working? And of course, the reason is that reverse also takes lists. And if you give it a list, it'll reverse that list. And map in Perl calls things in list context rather than scalar context. So we actually have to write map scalar reverse in order to do the same thing. So there we go, that now works. And of course the reason is that Perl's map is slightly different from Haskell's map. It's what's known in functional programming as a concat map. It concatenates a list of things, which in Perl you'd often just return one thing from a map expression, but you could in fact return 0 or more things out of it. And in fact, if you do the same thing in Haskell, you can see there that in that Perl version of a function that doubles the initial parameter, you just get a flat list, and in Haskell you actually get a series of nested lists. So if you had used concat map originally in the Haskell version, you'd also get the wrong answer, though a slightly different wrong answer than the Perl one. Okay. So if we wanted to get the length of a list of lists, in Haskell you could actually use the length function, because I lied earlier when I said that it took the length of a string. It takes the length of any list, and it treats a string as a list of characters. So that works perfectly well in Haskell. And of course Perl has a length function, as we discovered. Any idea what's going on there?
Stringified references.
Yes, because unfortunately the list 1, 2, 3 isn't a string. So first of all we have to stringify it to array bracket 0x293 etc., which is a string of 16 characters long. So that's not going to work. And of course in Perl you use the scalar keyword rather than the length to get the length of the list. So map scalar of the list gives us the list back again, because the list 1, 2, 3 is a scalar already, so we just return it. What we actually have to do is to dereference that list and then call scalar on it. So we've got a lot of power in Perl, and we can do exactly what we need to with it. Sometimes it seems that actually we're able to write the Haskell version more simply and more quickly without having to do some of this, but we can do whatever we want to with Perl, which is nice. So here's an example of getting the latter part of the list. So we've passed in 1, 2, 3 and 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We've just got the tail end of that list. Of course, the problem is that Perl doesn't have a tail function, so we have to write that, which is a list slicing expression. and it's not quite as nice. And in fact, obviously, we don't have to write that because we can define functions. So here we go. Here's a function called tail. It takes a parameter as a head, and it takes an array as the tail of a function. So it gives you the head and the tail, and then just returns the tail. And unfortunately, this doesn't quite work, because again, we're passing in a single list as the head, and there's nothing as the tail each time. So what we need to do is something like another conversion function that first of all dereferences that into an actual list, calls tail on it, and then wraps it up again in a list reference. So this is getting a little bit confusing. So my thought, having done this, I was basically writing these examples in order to give an early version of this talk. And I thought, okay, so what have I learned in Perl? You know, scalar and list context, you've got sigils, you've got the $_, optional parameters, references, type coercion, subroutine prototypes, and in Haskell you've got the type system. And people always say that type systems are really hard. And it's not that the stuff in Perl isn't hard and that there isn't stuff to learn. We still have to learn all of that, and it kind of gives us all the power and all the expressivity of a type system, but sometimes it's also easier to get the wrong answer. So I think we're often terrified of types, and all of these declarations here look a little bit confusing. And of course they look confusing, especially if you haven't already studied Haskell. But in fact, programming in Haskell can be exceptionally pleasant. So Mark Jason Dominus, again, wrote a blog post and a talk about programming in ML, which is a related language to Haskell, and pointed out that it's actually quite pleasant. Most of the time you don't need to actually write down the type definitions. The compiler writes them down for you. And when you have a problem, you'll usually get an informative error message rather than the wrong answer. So the conclusion really is that Larry Wall talked about manipulexity and whipaptitude, which are rather silly words for basically being able to handle complex problems and handle data and do interesting things with it, versus whipaptitude being the ability to get a really quick prototype and out and get something done. And I think even Haskell programmers would always agree that Perl's got whipaptitude, and they don't believe it has this ability to manipulate complex data. And I think we've shown that it can. And if you're a Perl programmer wondering, can you do something quickly and simply and pleasantly in Haskell, then do give it a go, and you might have some fun. Thank you very much.
Before Hakim darts back to his seat, do we have any kind of, obviously we've got plenty of time for the conversation afterwards, but any quick questions? In that case,
there's one more.
Yeah, sorry.
What have you found yourself using Haskell to solve? What kind of problems do you bring Haskell out?
So I should have said I don't work day to day with Haskell. It's a sort of a hobby language. The thing I've been doing most recently with it is modelling a crossword grid. And so being able to take, for example, a grid, work out which of the cells are the beginning of an across or down clue, and if you give it a list of